In this video, we are going to be doing some word problems with decimals. Let's begin. Example 1, Alicia and Steve made 4.75 gallons of lemonade. They want to use 3/5 of the lemonade for a party. So, how many gallons of lemonade will they use, and how many gallons will be left over? Well, here's the information they give us. This is a multi-step problem, and there's going to be more than one way to do the first step, which is how many gallons of lemonade will they use. So let's go ahead and look at the first step, which is how many gallons of lemonade will they use. We have two different ways of doing this. We can change 3/5 to a decimal by turning the denominator into a multiple of 10. So 3/5. Well, if we can turn that denominator, the bottom number, that 5, into a multiple of 10, such as 10 or 100 or 1,000, we can easily use that to turn it into a decimal, because if you multiply the bottom by 2, you get, and you multiply the top by 2, you get 6/10, which means 6/10, and 6/10 is just 0.6. The problem is that this method will not always work if the denominator can't become 10 or 100 or 1,000. So for example, if 1/3 can't have a denominator, or 1/3 cannot have a denominator of 10, you can multiply 3 by 3 and you'll get 9, or 3 by 4 you'll get 12, or 3 by any number, and you just won't get a denominator that's a multiple of 10, like 10, 100, or 1,000. So this won't always work, but our second way will always work. And the second way is basically to divide. So remember, a fraction is basically just a division problem. 3 over 5 is just 3 divided by 5. So 3 divided by 5. So how many times 5 go into 3? Well, it goes in 0 times, and 5 times 0 is 0. When you bring this 3 minus 0 is 3. A lot of people skip this step and they just write the decimal, put up the decimal. And when you put that decimal up, you have to add this 0 and bring it down and ask yourself, how many times 5 go into 30? Well, it goes into 36 times. 5 times 6 is 30, and 30 minus 30 is 0. So our answer is 0.6, as we figured out using our first way. So how many gallons of lemonade will they use? Well, and by the way, this method will always work. How many gallons of lemonade will they use? Well, our second step is 3/5 of the lemonade. Well, 3/5 is going to be 0.6, and 0.6 of the lemonade. Now, from here on out, you have to figure out whether you're going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. And it doesn't make much sense to add 4.75 plus, 0.6, nor does it make much sense to subtract. So you're either going to multiply or divide. And many of you are thinking, well, if they're using 3/5 of the lemonade, that's less than the 4.75 gallons they started with. So I must be dividing, right? Because normally when you divide, you get a smaller answer. But that's not true in this case. In this case, you actually want to multiply 4.75 with 0.6. And you're thinking, won't that get me a bigger answer? No. If you multiply a number with a smaller number or a fraction, anything less than 1, you're going to get a smaller amount. So for example, if I want to know what half of 10 is, I would multiply 10 by 1/2, and 10 times 1/2 is 5. And in this case, if I multiply 4.75 times 3/5, I would get 3/5 of 4.75. So that's just one of those things you should remember. So I'm going to multiply 0.6 times 4.75, and when I do that, I put the larger number on top. No, not greater, but the one with more digits on top. And 4.75 has 3 digits. 0.6 only has 2 or maybe 1 digit, depending on how you count it. So now we do multiplication as normal. 6 times 5 is 30. So bring up the 3, bring down the 0. 6 times 7 is 30, 36, 42. 42 plus 3 is 45. So 45, and now 6 times 4 is 24, plus 4, that's 28. And we are pretty much done, because there's no reason to multiply everything by 0. Notice I didn't have to line up the decimals when I multiply. So how do the decimals work out? Well, we have to count decimal spaces to see where it goes in the answer. So if I want to get rid of this decimal, I would count it 2 spaces over. And then if I want to get rid of this one, I have to move it 1 space over, for a total of 3 decimal digits. So our decimal starts right here, and we're going to go in 3 spaces. And our answer is 2.85. Some of you are wondering where that 0 is. If that 0 is at the very end, you can simplify by basically just getting rid of it. So what does 2.85 mean? Well, they were asking how many gallons of lemonade will they use? Well, the answer is they will use 2.85 gallons of lemonade. Our third step to answer the second question is how many gallons will they have left over? Well, if they're asking for how much is left over. If they're only using 2.85 from the 4.75, we're just going to subtract. So 4.75 minus 2.85 is going to be 1.90 because 5 minus 5 is 0. You're going to have to borrow for this. And once you figure it all out, you end up with 1.90. Don't forget that when you subtract, you do have to line up the decimals. And is this the most simplified answer? It is not. You can get rid of that extra 0 at the end. So they will have 1.9 gallons of lemonade left over after they use the 3/5 for the party. Here's an alternate method of doing this problem. Now, we're going to use fractions. So how many gallons of lemonade will they use? We can basically multiply 4.75 times 3/5. Now, remember 4.75 as a fraction is 4.75 over 1. And you multiply straight across as you normally do. So 4.75 times 3 and 1 times 5. So what is 4.75 times 3? Let's do some side work. 3 times 5 is 15. And then you multiply 3 times 7, add the 1, and do all that other stuff. You end up with 14.25. And so 4.25 over 5 is what you have left over. By the way, you don't have to write this. You don't have much room on your notes to write this down. This is just showing you a different method of doing this. So at the top is 14.25. The bottom, 1 times 5, that's 5. And what do you do from here? Well, it's a division problem. So 14.25 divided by 5. 14.25 divided by 5. How many times 5 go into 1? No times. How many times 5 go into 14? Well, it goes in twice. 5 times 2 is 10. You subtract that, and you end up with 4. I bring my decimal straight up, by the way. And then I'm going to bring down the 2. Now, how many times 5 go into 42? Well, it goes in 8 times, and 5 times 8 is 40. And you're left with 2. And then you bring down the 5. And how many times 5 go into 25? 5 times, of course. And 5 times 5 is 25. Subtract that, you're left with 0 remainder, so you don't have to keep adding zeros. And 2.85 was the answer that we got before. So that is another way of doing this if you want to go about it that way. Let's go ahead and try example 2 now. Naomi earned $54 mowing lawns in 2 days. She worked in 2 days, she worked 2.5 hours yesterday and 4.25 hours today. If Naomi was paid the same amount for every hour she works, how much did she earn per hour? Well, let's see. She worked 2.5 hours yesterday and 4.25 hours a day today, and she gets paid the same amount for every hour. So what we need to do is add up our hours. We have 2.5 and 4.25. Which equals 6.75. And what do you do from here? Well, 54, she made $54 and she worked for 6.75 hours. So what you're going to do from here is divide. Now, what are you going to divide? Well, you earn, how much did she earn per hour? Well, she earned 54. Per is like a fraction bar. So if you remember this, it's the money would go on top. She earns that. Per is a fraction bar. An hour, well, 6.75 hours. It goes on the bottom. So $54 per 6.75 hours. And again, this is just a division problem. 54 divided by 6.75. We have to move the decimal 2 places, which means we move this decimal 2 places and add those 0 placeholders. And how many times does 675 go into 5400? Well, this is really difficult. So I'll just cut to the chase. It goes in 8 times, and 675 times 8 is actually 5400. Goes in perfectly. You're left with 0. So she makes $8 per hour. And you ask yourself, does that make sense as an answer? Well, she worked for 6.75 hours, makes about $8 per hour. Does that make sense with, would that equal 54? I think if you multiply 8 times 6 or 8 times 7, you should get a number that's close to 54. You always want to check if your answer is reasonable. Let's go to number 3. Each part of a multi-part question on a test is worth the same number of points. The whole question is worth 37.5 points. Kimmy got 1/2 of the parts of a question correct. How many points did Kimmy receive? This is kind of a strange question, not only because Kimmy misspelled her name once or twice, but also because it's a strange question. So it's basically asking what is half of 37.5. Now, two ways of doing this. You can multiply decimals. So 37.5 needs to be multiplied by 1/2, right? Let's go ahead and, because we can't multiply these fractions, really, we can turn 1/2 into a decimal. So 1/2 as a decimal is just 0.5. Many of you know that already. If you divide 1 divided by 2, you end up with 0.5. So it's 37.5 times 0.5, and we're going to solve this out. 5 times 5. Well, once you multiply all that out, you end up with 18.75 points. The other way to do this is to multiply two fractions. So we have 37.5 times 1/2. We can't multiply a decimal with a fraction, so we're going to turn 37.5 into a fraction. So 37.5 as a fraction is just 37.5. And if we want to multiply this with, multiply it with 1/2, you can't have a mixed number here. So 37.5 as we need to turn this mixed number into an improper fraction if we want to multiply it by 1/2. So 2 times 37, and then you're going to add that 1. You end up with 75/2. So now we're replacing 37.5 with 75/2. You're going to multiply that by 1/2. 75 times 1 is 75. 2 times 2 is 4. And then once you turn that into a mixed number, again, you end up with 18 3/4 points, which is the same thing as 18.75 points. Let's go over the last example. This example is kind of, they want us, let's read it first. The bill for a pizza was $14.50. Charles paid 3/5 of the bill. Show 2 ways to find how much he paid. Now, this is kind of stupid in that they want you to do it, show you the decimal way and the fraction way, but the fraction way really doesn't make sense considering we're dealing with money. So let's go ahead and start on this because you'll see what I mean. $14.50, and if he pays 3/5 of the bill, you're going to multiply $14.50 by 3/5, and that will get you a smaller amount, which is what you want, because he didn't pay for more than $14.50, he paid less than it, but a little bit more than half, of course. So $14.50 times 3/5, we're going to convert 3/5 into a decimal, and once you do that, you get 0.6, and you could have figured that out if you did division. So $14.50 times 0.6, if you multiply that out, you end up getting $8.70. And so this is how this is one way you can find out how much he paid, is by turning this into a decimal and then multiplying it out. Now, the other way is to instead of turning 3/5 into a decimal, you're turning $14.50 into a fraction, which doesn't make that much sense when we look at it, because $14.50 as a fraction is 14 and 50 over 100, which, because that's 50 hundredths, which is the same as 14 and 5 over 10, or 14 and 1/2. And if we convert that into an improper fraction, it's 29/2. So now we've turned $14.50 into an improper fraction, which is 29/2. We're going to multiply that with 3/5. And then when we multiply 29 times 3, we get 87. If we multiply 2 times 5, we get 10. And then we have to turn this back into a mixed number. And so we get 8 7/10. Now, 8 7/10 what? Well, 8 7/10 dollars. Like I said, a bizarre way to show this, which is why this is not my favorite question. Anyhow, you're going to run into many other word problems. Use the clues you learned here. Try them on your own. Good luck.